Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my running back rankings for Week 10. As always, I intend them for half PPR leagues, but before we get into the ranked players, let's mention the unranked guys due to bye and injury. On bye, we have 4 teams unavailable this week. Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson of the Packers on bye. So are Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet of the Seahawks, along with Madison and Zamir White of the Raiders. Lastly, Nick Chubb and Jerome Ford of the Browns on bye as well. So all of these 8 players are unranked, and I also did not rank Isaiah Pacheco, who appears to be staying on IR for at least a week or two. They do not seem at all in a rush to get him back. Kareem Hunt playing very well. They will not risk Pacheco's health to get him back quickly. So those are the guys unranked. I do think McCaffrey will return. I'll get to his rank in just a sec, but let's get into these rankings. At number 1, I have Devon Achane at the Rams on Monday night because he's been a true stud with Tua this season. The RB1 in this sample size, the last 4 games with Tua, 24.3 points per game with 7 catches on 20.5 touches, 133 scrimmage yards, and 5 touchdowns. Not only is he guaranteed to find the end zone, but 7 catches is on pace with Chris Godwin and Garrett Wilson from a volume standpoint in the passing game. So he's a PPR cheat code. He's a little easy to forget about if you haven't watched the Dolphins since Tua had that concussion week 2. But dependent on Tua's health, Achane is money in the bank in fantasy football. He is a premier option, clearly in the elite tier. I have him at number 1 this week. At number 2, I have Bijan Robinson at the Saints, who's been great in his last 4 games. An average of 22 touches per game, 5 catches, 125 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Now that he's getting back in the end zone, you have no complaints, an average of 21 points per game. So he's the RB4 in that sample size, and this week he gets a top 2 matchup, an elite spot against the Saints, who just gave up 2 touchdowns to Chuba Hubbard. And in 3 career games, Bijan does average 19.3 points against them, 109 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He was limited to only 74 yards back in week 4 this season, but otherwise goes over 120 yards per game, and I think he'll do that once again. He will be excellent in this matchup. The Saints cannot stop anyone. They are the number 2 matchup, giving up 127 yards per game, 5.1 yards per carry, and 9 touchdowns over the last 5 weeks. Bijan will go off, and he's going to be one of the best plays this week. I think it could be his best game on the season. So love Bijan this week, definitely in the elite tier of running backs this week. At number 3, I have Joe Mixon versus Detroit, who I think will remain in the elite top 5 tier all season, especially with no Stephon Diggs. If Mixon remains healthy, he is one of the best options in that Texans offense. And although Nico Collins probably returns this week, Mixon's role is not going anywhere. In his last 4 games, he is the RB3, averaging 22.4 points per game with just under 24 touches, only 2 catches, but 124 yards with 6 touchdowns. He is guaranteed to find the end zone. And this week, the Lions are no longer a downgrade in terms of matchups. They now rank number 10 over the last 5 games. They have been pretty vulnerable. I think it's because Aiden Hutchinson is no longer with the team. Because of his injury, they've been pretty vulnerable in the run game, at least 126 rushing yards per game each of the last 2 weeks. So all of a sudden, the Lions cannot stop the run. They allow 5.6 yards per carry and 5 touchdowns on the ground over the last 5 games. They also give up above average numbers in the passing game to running backs. So Mixon will be just fine. You know, he's put up stud numbers this season. As long as he's healthy, he would be top 5 every week going forward. At number 4, I have Saquon Barkley at Dallas, and kind of feels blasphemous not to rank him at number 1 after the reverse hurdle. That was insane. One of the best highlights the NFL offered this year so far. It could be the best play. Maybe not. Maybe Garrett Wilson's catch was a little more impressive. But Saquon's, no matter what, a lock in your lineup, averaging 18.8 points per game the last month. Only 3 touchdowns, but we know that Jalen Hurts sometimes vultures him. 138 yards per game is guaranteed money in the bank type of production. So Saquon, a stud. I kind of feel too low at number 4, but doesn't get a plus matchup like Bijan or Joe Mixon this week. And Achane does catch more passes. They both average over 130 yards, but Achane gets more receptions. So Saquon, just a number 4, still a lock in your lineup no matter what. I also think Kamara is locked into your lineup at this point holy shit, with no other healthy options, his volume is guaranteed. Last week, he had 29 rush attempts and 6 targets, 6 catches, a total 215 yards, 24.5 points without a touchdown. So I could see 30 touches every single week, given the offense is so depleted. Kamara is really their only option other than Taysom Hill. So maybe Taysom can vulture him on the goal line and kind of eat into his value, but still I think Kamara's a lock for over 100 yards and probably is one of the safest bets every week now. He did fall off without Derek Carr, but Carr's healthy, so no worries there. And in his last 6 games against the Falcons, Kamara normally goes over 100 yards. He's done that in 5 of his last 6 games, but only 2 touchdowns. So probably going to see a similar story this week than last week with Kamara. He probably goes over 20 touches no matter what, could eclipse 30, goes over 100 yards for sure, but maybe no touchdown. Maybe that ceiling is a little bit capped, but in general, there's no risk with Kamara. Now, the volume's just so guaranteed. He will be fantastic once again. So top 5 this week, if you're getting 30 touches, you cannot bench Alvin Kamara. At number 6, I have Kyren Williams versus Miami, who is still one of the studs overall, getting about 24 touches per game the last 4 weeks. But he does have a fumble with 4 touchdowns, though. It's kind of irrelevant. And he gets a top 6 matchup on the year this week. The Dolphins have given up 12 running back touchdowns in 8 games this season. So he's definitely finding the end zone once again. He did not score last week, but it was a close divisional game. Sometimes those are strange. And occasionally he will not find pay dirt, but more often than not, it will happen. I think he definitely gets back in the end zone this week, and I'm still trusting Kyren. I will not overreact to one average game against a division rival. Number 7 is where I rank Christian McCaffrey at Tampa Bay. I do think he returns to the field in this game, but he is still questionable. It's not guaranteed. Given how much they've slow played him, it wouldn't shock me if they hold him out one more time. His practice window has been opened, but he has not been activated off of IR yet. You need to make sure it happens by Saturday in order to start him. But odds are I do think it happens. They kind of need him. They are barely in the playoff picture. At the moment, they are not a top 7 seed. So they do need some wins. He is a very important piece for their offense. And if he plays, you know he's a must start. But I wouldn't expect 100% of the typical volume, given it's his first game back. I do think they might lean on Guerendo and Mason just a little bit more than normal. So McCaffrey's still probably going to get like 18 touches in most circumstances. He will score a touchdown. He will be fine. Definitely top 10. But this week, not top 5 in his first game back. I just like to see it before I put him back at number 1. Number 8, I have Derrick Henry versus Cincinnati, who kind of feels blasphemous not to rank at number 1. But in week 5, the first matchup against the Bengals, it was one of his worst games of the season. While he did finish with 96 total yards and a touchdown, 51 of those yards came on one play in his second drive of overtime. Not a normal scenario to actually get the ball. That wouldn't repeat most of the time. So without it, he would have been a lot more mediocre, only about 10 fantasy points in that first matchup. And it's a Thursday night game. He is 30 years old. I can envision them taking him off the field a little bit more than normal just to make sure he does not get hurt. But he's a guarantee to find the end zone. He has 13 touchdowns in 9 games this season, so he's a lock. You're not benching him, but I don't expect his best game of the year. The matchup does rank bottom 5. The Bengals have only given up 77 rushing yards per game over the last 5 weeks on 3.6 yards per carry. So if he was limited the first time around, it probably does happen again. To a certain extent, I don't expect Henry to be lights out the best player on the field this week. I think this is one of his worst games of the year, but still top 10 at number 8. You're not benching Derrick Henry. This is the lowest I can go, but I do think he deserves a downgrade this week with Keaton Mitchell likely to make his debut. Maybe there's a house call that keeps him off the field a bit more than extra. So still starting Henry, but at number 8, a little bit less in terms of expectations for him this week. At number 9, I have Jahmyr Gibbs at Houston, who Feels kind of crazy to rank this low. He's been lights out the last 4 games, 18.6 points per game, 115 yards per game is elite. But the matchup is bottom 4. The Texans do stop opposing running backs and only allow 83 rushing yards per game. So could be a tough spot, but in general, the Lions' run game is never going to be stopped, so I'm still starting Gibbs no matter what, who appears to be separating himself a bit from David Montgomery, but this offense is always going to score, and Montgomery can always get back in the mix. If you get that matchup where Gibbs does not score a touchdown and Montgomery gets lucky enough where all of the touchdowns go to him, that does cap the upside. You might only get a 15-point game from Gibbs as opposed to a 25-point game. So at number 9, there's always that factor that Montgomery does cap his upside, and that's why I don't rank him above some other guys. But in the same tier as McCaffrey and Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs is still elite. At number 10, I have Breece Hall at Arizona, who has not found the end zone very much. The last 4 games, only 1 touchdown to speak of, and that's the main reason why he's only RB 14 in points per game in that sample size. But an average of 121 yards per game, it's not the volume that's a problem. It's just goal line touches that caps that ceiling. So at some point it will return. The Cardinals have given up 9 running back touchdowns in 9 games this year. So unless he gets vultured by Braylon Allen, odds are Breece gets back in the end zone. So I'm still going to trust him. I did rank him number 12 last week. I was worried he did not find the end zone as I thought, and I was right to downgrade him. But at number 10, I think he probably gets back in the end zone, but without it, he is not top 5. The ceiling is a bit lower for Breece this season than what we expected. A little underwhelming year for Breece, given expectation back in September. Number 11, I have Kareem Hunt versus Denver, who's also a player you're not taking out of your lineup. He's been lights out the last 4 games, the most touches per game than any other player. 25.5 touches, 1.3 catch, 95 yards per game, and 5 touchdowns the last 4 games, an average of 17.6 points per game. That's RB7 on a points per game basis. So he's a stud, definitely a lock. The volume is guaranteed. He also gets a top 7 matchup here. The Broncos have given up 6 touchdowns to the position on about 4 yards per carry the last 5 games. So I trust him to find the end zone. The volume will not go away from him. As long as Pacheco remains out, Kareem Hunt is that workhorse in Kansas City. If you picked him up off the waiver wire, he is a league-winning asset at the moment. So love Kareem Hunt. His floor is so safe. Every single week, Kareem Hunt can go over 20 points. Number 12, I have Chase Brown at Baltimore, who did play lights out last week with Zach Moss dealing with a neck injury out for a while. There is no real threat for Chase Brown in this backfield. They did just trade for Khalil Herbert, but in his first game with the team on a short practice window, they play Thursday. I can't imagine Khalil Herbert gets a ton of volume. Chase Brown should still get that massive workload like he saw last week. He had 27 rush attempts, 5 targets, 5 catches, 32 total touches, was elite. So that's probably not going to go away from him. While it is a Thursday game, he's only 24 years old. I don't think it's a big concern regarding his durability. So he probably maintains that volume, and with that type of work share, there's no chance you're benching him. He's a lock in your lineup going forward. I think Chase Brown might be ranked too low, but the Ravens matchup, not ideal. He could be limited a little bit, but odds are he finds the end zone, whether it's on the ground or in the passing game, especially if T. Higgins doesn't play. Chase Brown's their second best weapon, and they will lean on him like crazy. I trust his floor. I think Chase Brown is a guaranteed top 15 play. I kind of feel too low at number 12. Number 13 is where I have Jonathan Taylor versus Buffalo, and also kind of feel like I'm too low on him, but all of the names above him are just so good, so trustworthy. I think running back is just loaded this week, and that's why he moves down the board. But he's the RB8 in points per game the last 4 games, averaging 17.5. He has been just as good as Kareem Hunt, but the volume has been a little bit less so than the last 2 players I ranked, and he did not score a touchdown last week in that first official game with Flacco as the starter. So maybe the run game is a little bit diminished if you don't have the threat of Richardson alongside him, but I really just chalk that up to the Vikings having extra time to prepare and them being a really good defense capable of shutting him down. So Taylor was not that great last week, but I still trust him. I'm not going to panic after one bad game against a good defense. So he should bounce back. The Bills do give up a lot of catches to the running back position, about 55 receiving yards per game. League average is about 30. So Taylor should be able to exploit it. He probably does get more check down receptions than he would have with Richardson under center. So still trust him, still think he's a safe floor play. I think 15 points is still guaranteed, even at this stage in the rankings. At number 13, Taylor is still a must start, but a slight downgrade after last week with Flacco. Number 14, I have James Cook at the Colts, who's still a must start. He gets a top 8 matchup, and very few players have a higher ceiling than Cook, especially later in the rankings. It's pretty hard to find that moving forward. So still going to start James Cook, but at RB14, occasionally he gets vultured by Ray Davis. That's what happened last week. And he is only the RB13 in points per game the last month. 15.6 could be better. The volume is only 17.6 touches, 2.5 catches, 83 yards per game. With 4 touchdowns, he usually scores a touchdown. But if it doesn't happen, you would be a bit concerned. But like I mentioned, the matchup is top 8. The Colts can't really stop running backs. Giving up 4.8 yards per carry and 124 rushing yards per game is a very plus matchup. So Cook should be fine. I still trust him. I still think he's a guaranteed top 15 play. But if Ray Davis does score another 60-yard touchdown, then maybe that does cap James Cook's upside. Number 15, I have DeAndre Swift versus New England, who I wanted to rank higher. The matchup for him against the Patriots does rank top 3. The Patriots allow 158 rushing yards per game over their last 5 on 5.1 yards per carry. Along with 7 touchdowns, it feels guaranteed that Swift goes off here. I think he will go over 15 points, pretty guaranteed. New England allows 27.8 points per game on average. So really good spot for DeAndre Swift, and he's been really good the last 4 games. He is a top 10 running back on average. So love the floor. I think he will find the end zone. I think the safety net of his usage is guaranteed. He had about 20 touches last week. Even though he didn't score a touchdown, he did give you 11 fantasy points with 80 yards and 6 catches. So Swift is bust proof. I think in this game he should go over 100 yards again, and I would start him confidently. I think at number 15, DeAndre Swift is a must start yet again. At number 16, I have Dave Montgomery at Houston, who has fallen down a little bit in terms of production. The last 4 games, only RB27, averaging 12.1 points per game, 3 touchdowns, 1 fumble, only 71 yards per game. The volume has started to favor Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit, but I still trust Montgomery. I'm not worried about it. It can always pivot back to him at any time, and he could give you 100 plus yards and 2 touchdowns any given week. So he's still extremely valuable, still a must start, but at RB16, he has fallen down a little bit. I used to rank him back to back with Gibbs in the top 10 or 12. Now he is 7 spots behind Jahmyr Gibbs. At number 16, though, I'm still starting Dave Montgomery. He's a very safe floor play, and the touchdown probably comes back to him. But the matchup here is bottom 5. I could envision a world where he does burn you once again. You might only get about 10 points for Montgomery, but he's bust proof. I'm tempted to rank him much higher, honestly, and I do expect the production to come back. He'll get in the end zone multiple times very, very soon. So still trusting Montgomery at number 16. I still think he's a matchup proof must start play, but he has fallen to the mid-level RB2 range. He used to be at the low end of the top 10. Number 17, I love Tyrone Tracy this week at Carolina, one of my favorite starts of the week. A big upgrade because the matchup is phenomenal. The Panthers rank as the number 1 matchup this season. They cannot stop running backs, giving up 31 fantasy points per game, 142 rushing yards per game on 4.7 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns the last 5 weeks, and 39 receiving yards per game as well. Love this spot for every running back this season. No matter who it is, they always play well against the Panthers. So this week it's going to be Tyrone Tracy. While he wasn't amazing last week against Washington, that was a difficult defense to go up against, and the volume did not change. He was still overwhelmingly involved more than Devin Singletary. So that's all I need to know. The RB1 facing the best running back matchup in fantasy is a top 20 play every single week. This week it's Tyrone Tracy, and he's a must start. The Germany setting is irrelevant Tracy's performance will live up to expectation. I think he is a top 20 option, a must start in week 10. I also think J.K. Dobbins is a top 20 play versus Tennessee. You know the Chargers are going to win this game, and game script will definitely benefit J.K. Dobbins. And the Chargers' identity is unwavering on offense. You know exactly what you're going to get every single week in terms of game plan. As long as they're not losing at halftime and need to pivot, you know that Dobbins is going to consistently get his number called, and more often than not, he will find the end zone. Because of that, the volume will lead to at least 80 yards most of the time, as well as a touchdown. He has 4 touchdowns, 85 yards per game. In his last 4, he is the RB12, averaging just under 16 fantasy points per game. So he's a very safe play. The Chargers are a lock to win this week, and in my opinion, he is bust-proof. I think J.K. Dobbins is one of the safest plays you can find outside the top 15. At number 19, I love Aaron Jones upside this week at Jacksonville. He does get a top 4 matchup. They allow 100 rushing yards per game on 4 yards per carry, along with 7 touchdowns, 6.2 catches, an extra 42 receiving yards per game. League average is about 30. So Aaron Jones should dominate against the Jaguars, and odds are he does find the end zone. But I am concerned Aaron Jones only has 1 touchdown in his last 4 games, and that has been fading a lot from his profile. I worry about this offense getting him the ball on the goal line. They've moved away from it, and historically, Kevin O'Connell very rarely gives running backs a ton of touchdowns in his offense. Notoriously, since he's become the head coach, they have been bottom 5 in that category every single year. So whether it's Dalvin Cook, Alexander Mattison, or even Aaron Jones, sometimes this offense just does not care to run it when they get in close. I don't blame them when they have Justin Jefferson, but a lot of the time it's somebody else, like it's Addison. Last week it was Josh Oliver vulturing touchdowns, and it is annoying if you do roster Aaron Jones because his floor is very safe. He often goes over 100 scrimmage yards. He is averaging 87 over the last 4 weeks. But without the touchdown, you just don't get that elite ceiling. He's a bust-proof option this week, though. I think he's a top 20 play. The matchup is top 4. I don't think there's anything to point to as a reason to fade Jones this week. There's just your concern and fear he doesn't find the end zone. But even without it, I expect 12-plus points. Jones should go off against the Jaguars. Number 20, I have James Conner versus the Jets, who, just like Jones, not scoring many touchdowns lately, but his floor is guaranteed. In his last 4 games, averaging 97 yards per game. He did fumble, but that's pretty hard to repeat. I don't expect Conner to do it a lot. So if you get 12 points per game, kind of regardless of touchdown, I trust him no matter what. He's a very good floor play. And just like Aaron Jones, the only problem is that the touchdowns have mostly dried up as of late. So there's nothing wrong with him. If Amari DeMarcado's 50-yard touchdown went to Conner instead, then we'd be looking at him as a stud. Even Trey Benson scored last week. So it's not like they're never going to score a touchdown with Conner. It's just he's been unlucky. And even if he doesn't find the end zone, he's pretty bust-proof. I think he's the safe top 20 option no matter what every week. The ceiling will inevitably come back to him, and I would still keep betting on him. I'm not trying to bench him at all. At number 21, now we enter the high-end flex conversation. Rachaad White versus San Francisco feels like a great start, even in a bad matchup. He scored a touchdown against the Chiefs last week. That's hard to do. He was still very good in fantasy, paid off even in the worst matchup you could find. So against the Niners, although it is a bottom 10 matchup again, I kind of just don't care. Rachaad has been very good, averaging 14.6 points per game. The last 4 games, that is RB19 in that sample size. So love his floor. He's RB21 for me, so not far off from that production. And with 4 touchdowns the last 4 games, I trust him to find the end zone, especially with the receivers banged up. I expect the targets to continue. He has 4.3 catches per game over the last 4. So love that for him. The Niners do give up above average numbers in the passing game. So I do think he can produce. And given their offense, there's not many other weapons other than him and Cade Otton that you actually trust to get the ball. So love Rachaad White this week, a very high-end flex play. But because of his backfield companion, I do only have him at number 21. I have Bucky Irving right behind him at 22. They're kind of 50-50. They want to use these two players in a committee that uses them both at an equal rate. I do expect similar volume from Bucky Irving, but more work in the passing game for Rachaad, and that's why I trust him a little bit more. You could definitely get a better game from Irving, though, at any point in time. They're both really talented. I like the floor for both players. The upside's a little bit higher with Rachaad because of his pass-catching target volume. I think that's a bit more valuable in most fantasy formats. So I do prefer Rachaad straight up, but Bucky is right behind him. At 21-22, I would start both Bucs running backs against the Niners this week. At 23, I think Najee Harris at Washington is a little risky. The matchup does rank bottom 6, but Najee has been really good, really safe the last 4 games, averaging 108 yards per game with 2 touchdowns. An average of 14.7 does qualify him as RB17 on a per game basis. He's been really good, especially with Russell Wilson at quarterback. But even before that, the game with Justin Fields, before Russ was activated, Najee also went over 100 yards. So he's been doing that pretty consistently lately. I trust the volume. He should see about 20 touches. Even though Jalen Warren is getting healthier, he has not done much this season. He does not pose a legit threat for Najee as of yet. So I still trust Najee's floor, very high safety net with him, and he should see the volume to get close to 100 yards again. But the Commanders have really stepped up their defense lately, and there is a world where I could see him not find the end zone. That's not guaranteed. That's not the safest bet with him this season. And with only 2 in the last 4 games, it's about a 50-50 proposition. So that's what I think you need to put you over the top. I think it's a little bit more likely with guys like Rachaad and Bucky Irving. So this week against the Commanders, bit of a tough matchup. I only have him at number 23. He's just a flex play, more of a floor guarantee than that ceiling swing. I think there is a bit more of risk if you need 15 plus points. If all you need is 10 though, Najee's a pretty safe bet to get it. Number 24, I have Tony Pollard at the Chargers, who did get elite volume last week, did go over 30 touches with no Tyjae Spears in that offense. Last week, Pollard was a workhorse, but he gets a bad matchup. The bottom 2 matchup against the Chargers, they have really limited opposing running backs this season. Only 4.5 yards per carry for 81 yards, but 1 running back touchdown in the last 5 weeks. The odds that Pollard scores are very, very low. So the only worst matchup would be the Chiefs, and the Chargers are definitely a spot you want to avoid this season. Just asked Nick Chubb last week, but Pollard is much better than Chubb so far this season. He has played a lot better, and the volume has been 23 touches for him the last month. Just like Najee, I think the floor is very safe for Pollard this week. I think 10 points is probably a safe bet, but I do not think he finds the end zone. That's why the ceiling is not there. Outside the top 20, even with elite insane volume, I think Pollard is just a high-end flex play this week. At number 25, I have Chuba Hubbard versus the Giants in Germany, and he has been great. The last 4 games is averaging 13.1 points, but that's only RB25 on a per game basis. And this is where I rank him. And we do expect Jonathan Brooks to be activated and play this week. That is guaranteed. His practice window will be closed. He will be activated off of IR for the first time in his career. So that could really vulture some value. I could envision a welcome to the team touchdown going to Brooks, and maybe there's not a second one available in this backfield. But Chuba is not going to go away. I still think he's the RB1 in the Panthers offense, and he will be the safest bet. I do still trust the volume for him this week. The Giants also give up 123 rushing yards per game to opposing running backs this season on 4.9 yards per carry. I think he'll be very efficient, and I still trust the floor from Chuba. I think he gives you about 75, 80 yards in this game, no matter what. I trust the efficiency from Chuba, but maybe not that touchdown. If it doesn't happen, you will get burned, not go over 10 points. That's my only concern for Chuba this week, but he should be okay. I still think he's in the flex conversation, just more so on the lower end of the spectrum. He used to be a locked-in top 15 play. Now, it's a little dicey. We need to see what happens with Jonathan Brooks before we keep him in the top 20. Number 26, you probably think I'm too low with Bijan Robinson Jr. this week, but I am really concerned he does not play. He's questionable for that Steelers game, and he did not play last week after being limited all week in practice. So bit of a shocker in terms of his inactive status, but he is banged up. And even if he does play, I don't expect a full bevy of touches. We've seen it happen before where he only had like 3 touches, 2 of them were touchdowns, but otherwise it was a big committee behind him with Ekeler and Jeremy McNichols. So even if he does play, I think he's very touchdown dependent this week, and it is not a safe bet because they have a Thursday night game against the Eagles that is far more important for their playoff hopes than this game out of conference against the Steelers on Sunday. So I really don't expect them to push it with B-Rob. I think they probably rule him inactive, and he does play on Thursday. But if he does suit up, he's been so good this season, and he usually finds the end zone pretty guaranteed. I still think he'd be a good flex play in this spot, but I'd be very worried his snaps are capped. I don't think he sees more than 50% of the snaps if he is active. So that's why I'm bumping him down. If you disagree, I understand ranking him top 20. The matchup's also top 10. So the touchdown kind of feels guaranteed. I think the floor is decent as long as that happens, but without it, it's kind of non-existent. So touchdown dependent makes him a flex play. I don't think he's a safe bet to even suit up, but it is a morning game, so you'll know for sure. Brian Robinson Jr., though, I don't think will play. That would be my bet, and that's why I rank him lower. The matchup is better for pass catchers out of the backfield than regular running backs. So very touchdown dependent. It probably happens. So he's still top 30, but expecting limited volume is why I only rank him at 26. I don't think this is the week for B-Rob. I think they'll save him and make sure he's healthy for the divisional game on Thursday. Number 27, I have Rico Dowdle versus Philly, who's still a legit flex play, and I kind of am probably discrediting him. I've not been someone who's been ready to endorse Dowdle inside the top 25 very often. And given the depth at the position, I just don't see the space for him, but he has been RB18 in his last 4 games, averaging 14.6 points per game. The matchup against the Eagles, though, is terrible. It ranks bottom 3. The Eagles only give up 3.9 yards per carry, 65 rushing yards per game. But in the passing game, I think that's the saving grace. I think Dowdle will get a lot of targets, and the offense is so devoid of weapons. Beyond CeeDee Lamb, I think Dowdle's probably the safest bet to actually find the end zone in this offense. So the volume is legit, especially in the target share with 3.3 catches. You trust Dowdle to have a safe floor. 84 yards per game is what he's offered the last 4 games. So Dowdle's fine. I think even with the backup quarterback Cooper Rush, he should be efficient. Although the Eagles matchup is bad, he deserves a downgrade. That's why I only have him at number 27. But you could argue he's top 20. I do think Dowdle has good appeal. I would still try to start him if I can. Not a bad bet because the volume is so guaranteed. There's no threat behind him. With Zeke getting suspended, Cook being washed, and Hunter Luepke being a fullback, no one is a threat to Dowdle. So kind of like Tony Pollard, the floor keeps him in that start tier. I still think at 27, he's a safe flex play, probably good for 10 plus points. And the touchdown maybe doesn't happen in this matchup, but more often than not, rest of season, it probably hits for Rico Dowdle. Number 28, I have Rhamondre Stevenson at Chicago, who is actually a top 15 running back the last 4 games, thanks to 5 touchdowns, an average of 15.2 points per game. But that's very touchdown dependent. Without it, you're only averaging about 7.5 points per game on less than 60 yards, less than 16 touches per game. So Rhamondre is not a safe bet. This matchup against Chicago, though, just gave up 205 rushing yards against the Cardinals, and DeMarcado and Trey Benson both found the end zone. So I'm possibly dismissing Rhamondre way too much, but without a touchdown, he is not safe at all. So I'm not quite ready to endorse him. I think if it does not hit, you will get burned. And the Bears are a bit desperate. I could see them really bouncing back at home. Their defense usually really steps up. So a little risky. If Montez Sweat does not play, though, I'd probably upgrade Rhamondre. He'd be safer in that scenario, but still, you need a touchdown. And that's why I still rank him behind Rico Dowdle. There's a lot of good options I trust more in better offenses. But number 29, I have Raheem Mostert at the Rams. And at this point is probably the cutoff point where I would probably bench these running backs more likely than not. But Mostert still remains involved. The Dolphins usually score on the ground, and Mostert is usually pretty efficient. Last week, he had 7.3 yards per touch on 5.6 yards per carry. So you could do a lot worse than Mostert. He's getting about 13.5 touches per game in his last 4, and on just under 10 points per game, 2 touchdowns in 4 games is not a bad bet. So you could do way worse than Mostert. I do think he's a decent top 30 play, but low-end flex territory, probably worth a benching most of the time. At number 30, I have Tank Bigsby versus Minnesota, who is a player I would like to bench this week. I do not trust the volume for him. In a bottom 10 matchup against the Vikings, it could get rough. They limited Jonathan Taylor to less than 10 points last week, so Bigsby should get a downgrade, and they're pretty vulnerable in the passing game, but Bigsby does not catch passes. Last week, he did not get a single target. With Etienne back on the field, that really caps his upside. Bigsby still had the larger role, but not by much. He had only 8 rush attempts, but the game script definitely did not benefit him at all. But due to his lack of target volume in the passing game, he's pretty irrelevant. I don't trust his upside at all. Without the targets, Bigsby is not safe. So I would like to see it with Etienne in this backfield again before I trust Bigsby. I just don't know what you're getting from him from a volume standpoint. So with no receptions to help you, he's not a safe play. Tough matchup here. I'd rather bench Bigsby. He's not a guy you drafted expecting the world from. He's surprised you as he's overtaken Etienne the last couple months. So that's a nice value to get, but it's not someone that you need to be starting. He's pretty boom bust with Etienne on the field. And this week, I don't think Bigsby is a safe play. I'd rather start him than Etienne straight up, but at RB30, I don't think you have to start him. I'd rather keep him on the bench against the Vikings. Not my favorite spot for this backfield. Number 31 and 32, I have Isaac Guerendo and Jordan Mason back-to-back, and I'm not quite sure what the health status of Jordan Mason is entering this week. He got banged up before the bye. He was already banged up a few weeks before that, and Guerendo has looked like the healthier and more efficient player lately. And this week, I do see some opportunity for the backup with McCaffrey making his debut, not 100% healthy. I do see a little bit more work for the backup running back in this matchup. So there is also a world where CMC does not come off of IR, and one of these 2 players is the starter, and if that happens, they would be a top 15, 16 play. They would be must start this week. So a lot of potential upside looming for one of these 2 players. If Mason is healthy in practice, I would rank him above Guerendo for sure, and I'd bump down Guerendo probably unranked outside the top 50, but that's not guaranteed. It could be Guerendo who gets the start. If Mason is inactive, Guerendo could be one of the most valuable running backs this week. So kind of a tentative rank. I will be changing the rank on both players, but given McCaffrey's uncertain status, there is week winning potential for the Niners backup running back at this point in time. I'm not quite sure who will get the start or even who will be the backup. So that's why I rank them back-to-back, a bit of a cop-out. Only one of them will actually have this value, but on Tuesday, I'm not quite sure. I'll update this rank on Saturday, as always, and let you know who is the guy you need. But keep an eye on both. If McCaffrey doesn't start, they would have a ton of value in this backfield. At 33, I have Austin Ekeler versus Pittsburgh, who could be way more valuable if they do hold out Bijan Robinson Jr. for the 2nd week in a row. I could envision that happening. They need Robinson a lot more for the Thursday game against the Eagles, not this Sunday game against Pittsburgh. So if it happens again, then Ekeler would get a lot of touches, but he normally doesn't score a touchdown, so that's the only bummer with him, but he should be pretty efficient. The Steelers give up 5.2 catches for 47 receiving yards per game to opposing running backs. League average is about 30, so love the spot for him. The Ekeler passing game volume should really pay off this week. I do think he could score a touchdown, especially expecting some limited volume for Bijan Robinson. So Ekeler, a very legit plug and play. If you are desperate, if you need a backup to start, I think Ekeler is one of the better options this week. I kind of want to rank him above Mostert at RB29, right behind Rhamondre Stevenson. But at 33 in the similar tier, I still think Ekeler is a decent desperation start. But if you're not desperate, odds are you'll bench him. At number 34, I have Tyler Allgeier at the Saints, who we have seen some games where Allgeier is heavily involved. I could envision this being one of those games because the matchup is top 2 on the ground. The Saints can't really stop anyone, and if he starts off the game successfully, I think he will continue to get a lot of volume. It could turn into another 15-touch game for Allgeier if he plays well. So wouldn't shock me at all. He's a good dark horse candidate this week against the Saints. It is a top 2 matchup. Number 35, I have Ray Davis at the Colts, who did score a touchdown. A 60-yard touchdown pass last week was awesome, but it's not going to hit all the time. He's an interesting backup, though, because he does offer some explosive upside. James Cook has not kept him completely off the field. Number 36, I have Travis Etienne versus Minnesota, who I'm not ready to start. Don't quite trust his role yet, but he did get back on the field. At least he is actually playing. He did miss some time before that with injury. So there is a little bit of good news, but still not enough. He is the pass catcher, and Bigsby does not do that. So his role is not going to disappear, but he might only be the change of pace guy on third down. That's not what you drafted at all. So very much not ideal. I would be worrying about Etienne a lot, but he is starting to gain a bit of value. He's been unusable before last week, but for now, I still would not put him in the lineup. At 37, if you're extremely desperate, then maybe you'll pivot to Jonathan Brooks versus the Giants. It is a decent matchup, and Brooks is now guaranteed to come off of IR, given his practice window will be closing this week. He is forced to be active. So that is a good sign. He will be on the field, but how much will he play? I really don't know for sure. But in Germany, their only primetime game of the season, he is a second-round rookie, and they probably want to showcase him a little bit. I could see 5+ touches for Brooks immediately out the gate, and one of them could easily turn into a touchdown, given it's his first game with the team. That is often something that teams like to do, give that player a welcome to the team touchdown. So that's what you're hoping for. That's really the only way Brooks pays off. But there's also a chance he's very healthy and could see double-digit touches in this offense. But until we see it, there's a lot more risk than any guaranteed production, and that's why I would still probably keep him on the bench. Unless you're desperate, I don't expect much from him that we can trust until at least a week after the bye, which is coming after this game, so you probably never feel confident enough to start Brooks until as early as week 13. Even that is not guaranteed. We need him to play well this week and in week 12 to actually trust him. Until Hubbard gets hurt, I do not think Brooks is a top 30 option. So good luck if you are starting him, but there is some upside. He is very talented. We're going to see what happens. Until then, he's probably not a safe play. At 38 and 39, I have the 2 Denver running backs this week, the last RB1 of the week, and I do not want to start either of them against the Chiefs. No thank you at all. It's the worst matchup on the board, but Jaleel has earned a more legit role lately. He has been getting more involved, and he has scored more touchdowns than Javonte on the season. But I really don't trust Javonte at all. I would rather bench both of them. And I am going out on a limb here, but I will say that Jaleel is my bet to actually have more production this week against the Chiefs because of his pass-catching role and change of pace profile. I do expect a little bit more valuable touches for McLaughlin, while Javonte probably gets stuffed near the line of scrimmage most of this game. The Chiefs only give up 46 rushing yards per game on 3 yards per carry, only 1 touchdown to running backs the last 5 games. That was Rachaad White last week. So I really do not trust Javonte at all. I want to bench both players. No thank you at all. Worst matchup, definitely a spot to be avoiding the Broncos running backs. Number 40, I have Jaylen Warren versus Washington, who should be fully healthy at this point off the bye, but we have not seen him play well this year, so I don't trust him yet. At number 40, I would not be starting Jaylen Warren as of yet. These last 10 are definitely backups worth some watch list consideration, but there is a path for success. I could see it happening, but I'll just rip through them pretty quickly. I do think Justice Hill will get some extra touches on Thursday night, as the 30-year-old Derrick Henry might get some extra rest between plays. We've seen Hill be very involved a few times this year. This could be one of those games where he gets like 6+ targets. Number 42, I have Roschon Johnson versus the Patriots. A great matchup on the ground. The Patriots can't stop anyone, and Roschon does have several touchdowns, 3 in the last 4 games That's what you're hoping for with Roschon. Number 43, I have Cam Akers at Jacksonville, who gets a great matchup, and Akers is now clearly above Ty Chandler. He was the guy last season before getting hurt, and now that he's back on the team, it looks like O'Connell does trust him more than Ty Chandler. At number 44, I have Devin Singletary at Carolina. In Germany, he gets the best matchup possible, so even on diminished volume, he could be very efficient, maybe sneaks in to the end zone. At 45, Khalil Herbert at Baltimore. Maybe get some work. It is a Thursday night game, and Chase Brown just had 32 touches. If they need to give him some rest, it will go to Khalil Herbert. He might have a decent role like we saw Zach Moss have a couple weeks ago. So that's all you're hoping for, but at 24 years old, Chase Brown probably doesn't come off the field very much. Khalil is a liability, very risky play, given we've never seen it in this offense. Number 46, I have Keaton Mitchell in the same game, who's questionable, may not play, but was full in practice last week. I do think will make his debut on Thursday night. And last season, he was a house call machine. He only needs one touch to break it to the house. So hoping for some upside. He's an interesting pickup off the waiver wire, but I'm very desperate for running backs in the subscriber league, and that's probably the only reason why I'm considering him at all. He could definitely burn you. He could get no volume at all. Number 47, I have Samaje Perine versus Denver, who, until Pacheco returns, is still involved, is the pass-catching running back in this offense. He does get more targets than Kareem Hunt, and the Broncos do give up 44 receiving yards per game. League average is 30. Perine could play well in the passing game this week. At 48, I have Tyjae Spears at the Chargers, who hasn't played the last few weeks, but if he is active, could get 3 or 4 targets. Number 49, I have Braylon Allen at Arizona, and you're just hoping for that vulture touchdown, but it's not the worst bet possible. And lastly, at number 50, Trey Benson did get in the end zone last week. He might start to get more of a role. He is still looming behind James Conner, but not a safe bet at this point, just handcuff value if Conner goes down. So those are my running back rankings this week. The top 40 are here on the screen, and I think the position is loaded all the way through Rhamondre Stevenson at number 28. The matchup's not great for him. He is touchdown dependent, but he's been scoring like crazy lately, and he does represent the last player I would be interested in starting this week. But I think starting with Bucky Irving at RB22, that is the flex conversation. Bucky Irving through Rhamondre Stevenson are the guys I think will hover between 8 and 11 points this week and are just flex options in your lineup. But the top 21, I think, will go over 10 points guaranteed. I think 12 plus is a safe projection for all of those running backs. Very safe floor from everyone involved. So love running back this week. I think all the way through DeAndre Swift at number 15. 15 plus points is a pretty decent bet. And then at the top, I think the top 8 all the way through Derrick Henry, you probably expect 20 plus points if you are starting them. So running backs just so valuable. Some really good matchups and situations overall. So if you still have any questions, whether it's for full PPR formats or just individual decisions, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm happy to answer them. But that's going to be it for me in this video. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.